I'm glad to be back at Carmichael. And it's kind of fun to look around and see a few faces I know. That always makes me feel really much at home. As a preacher's kid in the late 1800s, I wasn't thrilled with many of the pieces of that job description. And it took me several decades of maturation before I realized that there were some staggeringly powerful benefits that I would not have had otherwise. And one of them is that as I study and do brain function research, Scripture keeps popping into my brain. And I've never found a piece of what I think is really good research that I could not find aligned with some Scripture. As I travel around the world, one of the biggest questions I get is, what's this stuff about the brain? Some people don't even seem to realize they have one. I'm telling you that everything starts in the brain. The research validates Henry Ford, who said, if you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. Your brain can only do what it thinks it can do, and you're the one who's got to tell it what it can do. I got to get used to this. This is not my remote. We'll get it. All right. Just give my brain a minute. It does catch on. So as I go around the world, I've never had this question from anybody but a Seventh-day Adventist congregation. Interesting. And I have spoken to many, many, many congregations of many different religious persuasions. But Seventh-day Adventists seem to want to know if science is scriptural. I mean, is it something we should be looking at? So I finally decided it was time to put a presentation together about science, especially related to brain function, and Scripture. So that's what we're going to do this morning. This is my brain's opinion. Scripture gives us admonition about how to be healthier and actually how to live longer. One of the things that Pastor Keith did this morning was have you read aloud. 10 minutes of reading aloud a day is now known to be age-proofing. How many of you read aloud 10 minutes a day? Help us all. They better start doing that, Pastor. It's age-proofing. So Scripture gives us admonition about what to do. I think brain function research gives us the reasons for that admonition, and it's very exciting for me. So we're going to do 7 of those. I'm going to go through them very quickly. Reverend, I can say that I'm a preacher's kid. I love it. Reverend Jacobson has explained to me in detail what will happen if I go too long. Therefore, I have all of these slides on my website under PowerPoints. If you want to go back and spend more time looking at them, feel free to do that, because we will be moving through them quite quickly. So 7 areas of research that I believe clearly align with admonition in Scripture. So the first one is the brain and happiness, and that's pretty clear. We know from studies that humor, laughter, supports not only brain function but immune system function. And people who laugh a lot tend to be healthier and to live longer. Unfortunately, I regularly meet people who have no laugh lines on their face. So I don't know what that says about their internal organs and their immune system function. So Scripture is really clear that happiness, depending on your translation, mirth, and so on, are medication, if you will. What are some of the benefits? Enhances communications between the two hemispheres, which tend to be roadblocked by stress. Helps with not only learning information, but storing it and retrieving it. Aids digestion. We could spend quite a bit of time on that. Probably don't have the time this morning. But it's the antidote, one of the antidotes for constipation, so let's just leave that there. Research shows that you need a minimum of 30 mirthful laughs a day to be healthy. Based on my question, how many of you read aloud each day? I won't ask that one. 30 a day. Go home and count them up. Centenarians, people who live a very long time, who are very healthy, tend to laugh between 100 and 400 times a day. So we need to take a page from that. Optimism, part of the happiness, joy, laughter part of life. Health benefits, increased lifespan, lower rates of depression, lower levels of distress, greater resistance to colds. Did you know that laughter increases a piece of the immune system that fights against viruses, colds, flu, and cancer? Better psychological and physical well-being, reduced risk of cardiovascular disease and death, and better coping skills during stress, all from optimism, happiness, and laughter. And when I see someone who has no laugh lines on their face, I try to have a little chat with them. Because if we're trying to role model that this way of life is the best way to live, who in the world will believe that when we look like this? New research on people over the age of 65 that applies to a few of us here. U.S. National Institute of Aging, optimism, associated with the reduced likelihood of cognitive impairment over time. What does that mean? It means you're more likely to hang on to your marbles. Better eating and exercising habits, reduced risk for strokes and heart attacks, better problem solving and judgment abilities, fewer memory problems, and beneficial health-related outcomes, especially as studied in cancer survivors. Can't afford to miss that. 2, the brain and prayer, which is a form of meditation. For those of you who are terrified with the word meditation, prayer is just a type of meditation. It can decrease metabolic activity. What does that mean? It means that you think clearly using less energy. And when you use less energy, it lasts longer, duh. It can increase blood flow to all of the main parts of the brain. And you need that because the brain maintains only 10 minutes worth of energy at any one time. And you need a continual replenishment of that through blood flow. So increased blood flow is very helpful to your brain. And it may trigger something called deafferentation. That actually means that the messages of pain don't even seem to go up to the brain. And so there are some studies that show in some individuals prayer can help with pain. It impacts the brain in all kinds of ways. When I was a girl, I had trouble with the text, pray without ceasing. I would say to my father, the preacher, pray without ceasing? I can't do that. I got to practice an hour a day on the piano, half an hour a day on the Vibraheart, do my homework. I can't pray without ceasing. What does that mean? And he patted me on the head and said, just do your best, honey. And now we realize that prayer is actually an attitude. You can pray anytime, anywhere. I do some of my best praying on the freeway. So I do not, however, fold my hands and close my eyes. Although that is what I was taught was the only way to pray. Reduces headaches, worry and anxiety, heart attacks, high blood pressure, wound healing. Actually gives you, as the researchers put it, some control over the way in which your brain ages. And we've talked about that a little bit. Study participants who prayed or meditated or reflected for 12 minutes a day, which is not very much, experienced significant improvements in their memory. Having trouble remembering? Might want to think about prayer and meditation. Here's drawings of 2 PET scans. And this is what I love about brain function. You can see the brain while the person's still alive and it's actually working. So you see on the left, this is a scan of an individual brain that is not praying, thinking about something else, whatever they're doing. And the one on the right is the scan while the person is praying. Now, you might not think that that's a lot of difference, but neurologically it is, and let me show you that. Can you see that there's a lot more red in the frontal lobes while the person is praying? That means that part of the brain has increased activity. And you can see the right temporal lobe here has a lot of increased activity. And then the temporal lobes have everything to do with reading and writing and listening and emotions and so on and so forth. So we know now a little bit about how prayer changes your brain. 3, as you think in your heart. Had trouble with this growing up too. I remember asking a well-meaning but unenlightened Bible teacher, and I'm not looking at anybody in particular, what does that mean as you think in your heart? And back then, we did not know. And so he said, well, you know, they were fishermen who wrote Scripture. They weren't terribly well educated. So this is what you do, Arlene. Every time you use that Scripture, you substitute the word mind. As you think in your mind, so are you. So for nigh on to 100 years, that's what I did. And then we found that the heart has neurons. 40,000 is the minimum number that McGill University have counted in a heart. They look like the same neurons in the brain. They use the same neurotransmitters. They think. You do think with your heart. It's just that it's a subconscious organ. There is an unmediated connection between the heart and the brain. And you have to get the information up to a conscious part of the brain before it can tell you what your heart is thinking. But we do think with our hearts. That's not all. And I hope some of you already know this. The enteric nervous system, our gut, our gastrointestinal system, filled with neurons. They used to say as many as in any peripheral body organ. And now researchers are saying maybe we kind of underestimated that. There's probably as many neurons in your gut as there are in your brain. Subconscious, but they're thinking all the time. Not only that, your enteric nervous system contains 90% of all the serotonin in your brain and body. Are you familiar with the word serotonin? Serotonin is an amazing neurotransmitter that has everything to do with how well you sleep, Probably has a lot to do with how easily you're depressed and how quickly you can overcome that. And 90% of it is not even in the brain. It's in your gut. 50% of all the dopamine in your body is in your gut. Do you know the word dopamine? It's associated with every addictive behavior we've ever studied. Your gut is really your second brain, independently working with all of these neurons. The children's story this morning, getting punched in the solar plexus. Many of us had that experience, unfortunately. Well, the solar plexus is a group, a big chunk of neurons, and they do not like to be hit, let me tell you. So you get sucker punched in the, your solar plexus, and yes, you can pass out, hit the ground, and so on. Irritable bowel syndrome, and some of you probably heard that, is now being called an enteric neuropathy. Enteric meaning it's the GI system, and neuropathy meaning the nerves, the neurons are unhappy. So there may be some changes in the way that's treated. So you think with your brain neurons, but you also think with your heart neurons and your gut neurons and any other place in the brain that has neurons. And that's one of the reasons, the vagus nerve, I'm sure you've heard of the vagus nerve. It's a huge nerve that goes from the GI system to the brain. They think that is now the reason that children get so anxious when their parents argue and fight. They get sick to their stomach. They don't want to go to school. And nobody knew what that connection was, but we think now it's those neurons thinking about how unhappy their parents are, and therefore how scary that is and how unhappy their life is. And so no wonder they act out at school. 4, that brings us to brain and worry. And people want to argue with me about worry. Somebody said to me the other day, but there's some things we should worry about. And I go, really? Name one. Well, we should worry about whether we're ready to become part of the family of God. And I said, in your dreams, you've accepted it or you haven't. Worry isn't going to help you get there.
That's right.
It's just going to downshift your brain so you can't think clearly. And this is a cutaway of the brain. So you can see there are 3 distinct layers. There's the first reptilian layer, which has the fight-flight response. There's the middle layer, which is where you have emotional impulses and where you can only think about the present and the past. So if you're going to relapse, you do it when you're in that middle layer. And then you get up to the top layer where we do have some conscious thought, and where behind the forehead in the prefrontal cortex, we have some pieces that have not been found anywhere in other mammal brains. And that's where we have willpower and morality and decision-making and planning and so on and so forth. When you worry, when you are anxious, the brain begins to devote its energy and attention down to the subconscious parts of the brain, and you lose the easy access to those critical functions. So when a kid at school is anxious and worried, I'm going to get in trouble again. I think I'm going to fail. That brain just downshifts, and you hand them the test to take, and they can't think of word 1, even if they know the information, because the information's got to be consciously retrieved, and they're outside the conscious part of the brain. So the Apostle Paul says, don't worry about anything, because worry never, ever positively helped any solutions. Yes, you want to problem solve, but get rid of the worry and anxiety. When your brain gets downshifted from fear, which is the umbrella for worry and anxiety, you need a couple strategies to get up to the conscious part of the brain quickly. These are my top 2. Can I find something humorous about the situation? And I usually can. That's what saved my life as a preacher's kid. Being able to laugh at all the craziness. And the 700 members, each of whom knew exactly how the preacher's daughter should behave. None of whom agreed. So if I can find something humorous, I know I'm upshifted, because humor is a right frontal lobe function. And I know I'm up there in that top layer. And if I cannot find something to laugh about, which occasionally happens, I have to go straight to gratitude. Because gratitude, according to PET scan studies, cannot coexist in the brain in the presence of anxiety or fear. Which is probably the reason Paul and Silas, although I wasn't there personally, I understand saying when they're locked in prison, okay, there's gratitude, so they're no longer fearful. What does anxiety and worry do? Horrible things. Immune system suppression, digestive disorders, increased muscle tension, which just uses up energy, short-term memory loss. Having trouble remembering? How much are you worrying? Premature coronary artery disease, heart attacks, depression, and even suicidal thoughts, none of which are in my menu of desirables. The brain and gratitude. Give thanks in all circumstances. Fortunately for me, it doesn't say give thanks for all circumstances. It says give thanks in all circumstances, because it has a tremendous effect on heart rhythms and regularity. For example, on the left is a drawing of heart patterns when the brain and the heart are grateful. They're in a state of gratitude. Look at how nice and regular they are. The drawing on the right shows the heart patterns when the brain and the heart are worried and anxious and frustrated. And that's one of the reasons, perhaps, that worry and anxiety tend to increase your risk for cardiovascular problems. I love what Oprah Winfrey said. Be thankful for what you have. You'll end up having more. If you concentrate on what you don't have, you will never, ever have enough. So take that to heart. No matter what happens, find the silver lining. There's always one, always a plus that comes out of every experience if you look for it and you're willing to embrace it. Identify what you can learn. If nothing else, avoid that circumstance in the future if you can. And of course, we're back to be grateful. So here's the science. Flat out, the only antidote to fear, anxiety, and worry that we know of at this point in time is gratitude. So embrace it, live it, run with it. 6, study to show yourself approved. I like David Dunning's quote, "The trouble with ignorance is that it feels so much like expertise." And having just come off of an interesting whatever, well, that gives me a little food for thought. Here's the deal. We've been leased a living vehicle to use on this planet, brain and body. There's no evidence we're taking it anyplace else. When I looked at this, I thought, study to show yourself approved. Why not study to show yourself wiser? Study to show yourself smarter. So I decided to look up the word approved, and I realized that it is a permission to do something. And some of the key things that we get approved for, a passport, I just had to renew mine. You get approved for a marriage license. Too bad sometimes. You get approved for a divorce, which is really harder to get than the license was. You get approved for adoption. You get approved to go get a TSA pre-check, on and on and on. And you get approved for leasing a vehicle. So Thomas Alva Edison, I love what he says, and these guys didn't even have the benefit of brain scans. He said the chief function of your body is to carry your brain around. That's how important he thought the brain was. So here's the deal. Are you studying the best way to take care of your brain and body so that whenever you turn it back in, you will be approved for how the vehicle got turned back in after the lease? Yes. And I think we are forgetting about that. From a Christian perspective, this body who carries the brain around also is the place, the vehicle, if you will, through which we can get impressed by spiritual things. So when the time comes to turn my vehicle in, I hope it's very, very old. Current research is that we can live to be 120 easily if we take care of this vehicle. It'll be very old. I will have more wrinkles on my face. I hope most of them laugh, wrinkles. Yes. But I want that vehicle to be in the best possible condition for its age, that I can turn it in that situation, in that condition. And the last one is people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And I didn't get that for a long time, because this is the information age. We are inundated with information, and yet people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Okay, how is that? So Dr. Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is arguably the foremost researcher in epigenetics, cellular memory, said this: your perspective, and every brain only has its own perspective, your perspective is always limited by how much you know. Expand your knowledge, and you will transform your mind. Because information and knowledge are not the same thing. Information from my mother, the school teacher, and she did give me a wonderful background in words. I'm told that she read out loud to me for 30 minutes every single day from the moment she found out she was pregnant. Wow. And now we know that those kinds of sounds heard over and over and over again impact the baby's developing brain. So like Mozart was believed to be born with harmony already developed because his mother practiced the piano 8 hours a day, I think I was born with the love for words because my mother read to me out loud every day. And in the process, look what she did to her brain. So if you're going to use the vehicle metaphor, information says you got the facts. You know what kind of vehicle it is, you know how to drive it, and so on and so forth. But that's all you have. Knowledge, on the other hand, is defined as something that happens through experience, by practical application. So going to the vehicle metaphor, you got the information, but now you are honing your skills. You actually know how to do the stuff, and you're practicing it. And that's the difference. We don't perish for lack of information. We perish for lack of knowledge, and that's a choice. The human challenge is, as Confucius put it, and no, I didn't know him either. Came back from Greece not long ago, and I was all excited about work by Epictetus, who has taught us a lot about stress reduction. One of the young people Oh, and by the way, I love talking to the young people yesterday at the school. Bunch of bright brains. Not done yet, but lots of bright brains and lots of testosterone. Reminded me of raising my 3 sons, made me feel really comfortable. Okay, so Confucius said, it's not that I do not know what to do. It is that I do not do what I know. And there's the difference between information and knowledge. And the Apostle Paul followed up with that. I don't know if he got it from Confucius, but he says, what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate to do, I do. And that can be changed. So there you have it. Socrates. The unexamined life is not worth living. Meaning, as I would paraphrase that, if you don't examine yourself, learn, turn that into knowledge and practically apply it, what have you got at the end of your life? Not anything compared to what you could have had. So when you know better, you can do better. But again, it's a choice. So my brain's opinion is so completely excited about brain function information because it provides the reason for admonition in Scripture that just tells you what to do, but is unable to give you that level of detail because they did not have brain scans way back when Scripture was written. It shows the reasons and how we can prosper and be in good health, even as our soul and spirit prospers.